Welcome to Educon. In this video, we will learn about eukaryotic cells. What are eukaryotic cells? Eukaryotic cells includes protists, plant cells, animal cells and fungi. As we know about prokaryotic cells and also the difference between the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. In eukaryotic cells, there is an extensive compartmentalization of cytoplasm through the presence of membrane bound organelles. So, in prokaryotes we are not seeing any kind of membrane bound organelles, but in eukaryotes you have a membrane bound organelles such as mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus and chloroplast and etc. So, here there is membrane bound organelles in eukaryotic cells and also their DNA is organized into chromosomes. Whereas in prokaryotes sometimes single stranded DNA is present, but in eukaryotes you have an organized nucleus where their DNA material is organized into chromosomes. In addition to membrane bound organelles, eukaryotic cell does possess complex locomotory and cytoskeletal structures. What are these two? Complex locomotory means example like cilia and flagella, which helps in cell movement, and also cytoskeletal structures means microfilaments, microfibers, microtubules, and which helps the which maintains the shape of the cell, and also they anchor the organelles inside the cell. So, cytoskeletal structures, they anchor the organelles. Organelles means membrane bound organelles. And not all eukaryotic cells are identical. For example, plant cell and animal cell, they are different, as plant cell possess cell wall and plastids and large vacuoles which are completely absent in animal cells. But in animal cells we have centrioles which are absent in plant cells. Cell membrane. Cell membrane is the covering of the cell which protects the cell from external factors. So, cell membrane mainly composed of lipids and proteins. So, lipids or major lipids are phospholipids which are arranged in bilayer fashion. So, here where the polar heads will be facing on either side of the membrane, their hydrophobic tails, that is non-polar in nature, they are embedded in the membrane itself, and also proteins can be buried in the membrane or they can be peripheral. So, proteins can be integral proteins or peripheral proteins, which are embedded means integral proteins means they are present buried in the membrane, whereas the peripheral protein which are present on the surface on either side of the membrane. In 1972, Singer and Nicholson, they proposed fluid mosaic model. To understand how the molecules of proteins move across the membrane. So, because this function is also the fluid nature of the membrane is also important in cell growth, formation of intercellular junctions, secretion, endocytosis and also cell division. So, the quasi mosaic nature means partially solid, partially liquid, because in these lipids, when you heat them it will become liquid, when you cool them it will become a solid. So, the quasi nature of this lipid enables the proteins to cross across the membrane. So, this theory explained to us. And also most important function of the plasma membrane is, that is the cell membrane, is transporting molecules across the membrane, because molecules are necessary for the cell to survive. They need molecules for certain functions. Here, when molecules cross the membrane from higher concentration to lower concentration, for example, there is certain number of ions more on the outer side of the cell than the cytoplasm. So, what happens then? Then molecules cross the membrane without energy being used, that is ATP or any other carrier protein. In that sense, it is called passive transport. Whereas some neutral solutes, they too will cross the membrane, and by simple diffusion, water also will pass the membrane by the process of diffusion, which is called osmosis. And also certain molecules, when they are moving from this end to this end, from outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, they cannot cross because they need certain carrier proteins to be present. So, this carrier protein, they will bring the molecules from across the membrane. And also in certain molecules, the concentration gradient, like example, from, as we know before, what is passive transport? From, it is a concentration gradient process where molecules move from higher concentration to lower concentration. When the same process reverse, when the molecules move from low concentration to higher concentration, then that is ATP dependent, that is energy dependent reaction, which is called active transport. Example, sodium and potassium pump. So, what we learn here? Passive transport, osmosis and active transport. Passive transport means there is no any energy dependent reaction, the molecules cross the membrane, okay. And in osmosis, that is by a process of diffusion, where neutral solutes pass through the membrane by a process called simple diffusion, which is called osmosis. And active transport, in active transport, the molecules move across the membrane against the concentration gradient, like from lower concentration to higher concentration. So, what happens here? Energy is consumed in the form of ATP. So, this is ATP dependent reaction, which are called active transport. Cell wall is a non-living rigid structure which forms the covering over the plasma membrane. It protects the plant cell from mechanical damage and also any other infections. The composition of cell wall is different. In algae, it is made up of cellulose, galactans, mannans and calcium carbonate. Whereas in plants, it is made up of cellulose, hemicellulose, pectins and also proteins. So, what we learn here? Cell wall in different organism, it is different, means the composition is different, where in algae it is made up of cellulose, galactans, mannans and calcium carbonate, whereas in plants it is made up of cellulose, hemicellulose, pectins and proteins. And in any new plant, the primary means, as the plant, in primary stage of the plant, it is called as a primary cell wall, which in lateral growth, means after maturity, slowly the primary cell wall diminishes or disintegrate and forms a secondary cell wall above the plasma membrane. And on the image here, consider these are different cells, okay, joining together. The cells are joined using with the help of middle lamella. So, here this middle lamella act like a glue. It bonds surrounding cells, and it is made up of calcium pectate So, what this middle lamella do? It will join different cells together, surrounding cells. At the same time, there are channels which are called plasmodesmata. So, these channels, they traverse through the cell wall and middle lamella, and they make connections between the cytoplasm of neighboring cells. So, what is this plasmodesmata? They are the traverse channels between the cell neighboring cells, which helps to connect the which help in connecting the two cells with their cytoplasm.